We're joined once again this evening by Don Tapscott. He's the author of Macroeconomics. This is the second installment in our four-part look at the information age. Last night started the week with a look at networked intelligence and an era of collaboration. Well, tonight we look at the net generation, those that have grown up in a world where the internet is as ubiquitous as the television was for baby boomers. Hi, Don.
Hello.
Okay, so we always talk about young people who live online. Who are we talking about?
Well, it's the baby boom echo. The baby boom was born between 1946 and 1965. Then the birth rate dropped off for 12 years as the boomers delayed having kids. And around 1978, they started producing kids. And between 78 and 97 inclusive, they produced this big generation. There's 8 million of them in Canada. It's only 7.85 million baby boomers. But the thing that makes them different is not just their demographic muscle. This is the first generation to be bathed in bits. Computers, the internet, interactive technologies are part of the experience of youth. And time online for them is not taken away from hanging out with your friends, learning the piano, talking to your parents, doing your homework. Time online is taken away from television. The boomers watch 24 hours a week of TV per kid. These kids watch a lot less TV, and they watch it differently. They come home and they turn on their computer and they're in 3 different windows. They got 3 magazines open and they're texting and they're listening to MP3 files and talking to their friends and with a video game. Oh yeah, and they're doing their homework. And, but this is changing the way a whole generation thinks and learns. It's actually affecting their brains. And overall, this is not bad. It's something that's positive.
They behave differently. Do they think differently?
Yeah, I think they do. To be clear here, there's a lot we don't know about the brain. We've learned more about the brain in the last 5 or 6 years than we've learned in all of history. But we do know that there are 2 critical periods of brain development, 0 to 3, that's not affected much by this. But the other one is called extended adolescence, 8 to 18. And how you spend your time during that period is the big variable determining what your brain is like. A third of the human brain gets wired during this period. And if you're the passive recipient of TV for 24 hours a week, that gives you a certain kind of brain. It's like my generation. If you're the active handler, the thinker, the rememberer, the composer, the authenticator, the multitasker, that affects your brain as well. And from what we know, it's not bad. I have parents come up to me and say, you know, how can it be that my 14-year-old is getting A's when she does like 5 things at once, including her homework? And I always ask them, well, you know, is she a good kid? Does she get out? Does she have friends? And if they say yes, I say, well, we're not talking about a problem here. We're talking about something interesting. And from what I can see, talking to brain scientists, is that she's not actually multitasking. She's got better active working memory and better switching abilities. So it looks like she's doing a bunch of things at once, but she isn't.
You know, the common criticism or the common concern, let me put it that way, is that this generation, they are staring at the computers, they're isolating themselves, they're self-absorbed, they're narcissistic. I mean, they're posting banal stuff on Facebook and Twitter. And we hear all of that. Is that an accurate assessment of this net generation?
Well, it's a dominant point of view. Kids are net addicted, glued to the screen, losing their social skills. The internet is eating the neocortex of youth today. Front page story in the Sunday New York Times. Growing up digital, wired for distraction. You're thinking about narcissism. There's a book called Generation Me that says we've created a little army of narcissists. You know, all they care about is their YouTube and their Facebook and Twitter and so on. You know, they don't give a damn, and they're violent and into drugs and alcohol, and youth culture is bad. The big problem with this kind of negative point of view about kids and technology is that there's not really any data to support it. They're the dumbest generation. Well, I'm sorry, but kids are graduating from university like never before. SAT and GMAT scores are at an all-time high. Our measure of intelligence is called the IQ. IQ's been going up for many, many years. And they can't focus. Well, you need to focus to write an essay and to graduate from university. They don't give a damn. Youth volunteering in Canada and in the United States has been growing year over year for 15 years. They're violent. Well, I'm sorry, youth crime has been dropping year over year for 15 years. They're into bad stuff. The percent of kids in the United States that are clean in high school, that don't do either drugs or alcohol, has been going up year over year for 15 years. So we can actually be enormously hopeful about this generation.
So why then is the perception off the mark?
Well, I think we fear what we don't understand. You know, we look at kids doing a bunch of things, including their homework, and we draw conclusions that are inappropriate. There are some real problems too. I mean, I don't want to sound too polyandric here. You know, the top third of kids in Canada are doing great in the schools. The middle third are doing pretty well compared to previous generations. The bottom third are dropping out of school. Now, there are real reasons for that, I think, that we need to fix. You know, these kids are coming from single-parent families. I mean, the mom doesn't have time to talk to the kids, let alone work with them on their homework. There's inner-city gang-related stuff and bad youth culture stuff related to that. Kids are coming to school hungry. We have a model of learning that's you know, teachers lecturing to students because class sizes are big. To blame the internet for the problems the bottom third is having, it's not very helpful. It's sort of like blaming the library for ignorance. You know, the internet is not the problem here, and as it turns out, it's a big part of the solution.
We hear stories all the time in the media about all kinds of people, but a lot of times young people doing something that a lot of people would think was a bit irresponsible. For example, posting a picture of themselves on Facebook, smoking a joint, having some marijuana. I mean,
Yeah.
How smart is it to post? It's one thing to post things that are legal, but post pictures of yourself of doing something illegal. Probably not the smartest thing. I guess the question is, what are the repercussions of that?
Well, this is one of my biggest concerns about the generation. That on the one hand, this is the first time in human history when children are an authority about something really important. I was an authority on model trains when I was 11, and today the 11-year-old at the breakfast table is an authority on this digital revolution that's changing every institution. But just because they're an authority on something doesn't mean they're authorities on everything. And some things take experience to understand, like you need to protect your personal information. And privacy is the foundation of a free society and, to a certain extent, of success. I think there are hundreds of kids this year in Canada, maybe more, that will not get that dream job because it was all looking good, then they failed the reference check, right? Their employer goes online, looks on Facebook, and sees them smoking a joint or wearing something or drinking something or saying something that you might do when you're 17 that's not really who you are. A friend of mine, Tim Berners-Lee, is actually the inventor of the World Wide Web, has got a great position on this. He says, I think just like we have legislation that you can't discriminate based on sex or race or gender, race or age and sexual orientation, you shouldn't be able to discriminate against somebody based on something they said on Facebook prior to the age of 19. So, but I mean, people who are watching this show and have teenagers, I hope if they remember one thing, is to sit down with your teenager and get them to fix their Facebook privacy controls.
But is the problem privacy? I mean, this generation, the lines between what's private and public are very blurred, and they don't seem to care much about it, to be honest, and sort of talking to people of that generation. Are they the problem, or is our sort of traditional idea of privacy the problem?
No, I think that their behavior is the problem, and our traditional idea of privacy is a good one. And I don't think it should change. I mean, there's a real danger here that we'll leave a trail of digital crumbs as we go through life, and the virtual Pia may know more about you than you do, because you can't remember what you bought a year ago or what you said a year ago or what you did. And there's the potential destruction of everything that we've come to know as our basic right to privacy. And the problem, originally we thought it was Big Brother, right? That the governments are going to be spying, and that's still an issue. I mean, McCarthyism wasn't that long ago, and you think about Nazi Germany and the knock on the door and so on. But then we have this other problem called Little Brother, which is corporations collecting all this information about you. And when they have this, they can do things like they can manipulate you or they can interfere with your life. And then now we have this crazy thing that I've called Baby Brother, where you have all these people just willfully giving away all their personal information. The problem is actually us and our own behavior. I think privacy is a foundation of a free society.
Is the internet going to change how we perceive risk?
Well, it's changing the nature of risk, that's for sure. I mean, you look at something like the interconnectedness that we have. I'm involved with the World Economic Forum. It's something called the Global Risk Response Network. And there are a couple of dozen ways that the whole global economy could be shut down. And they're not just the things you'd think of, like the meltdown of the financial system or terrorism or climate change or infectious diseases or nuclear war or something like that. There are things like that come from our interconnectedness. Like, for example, the supply chain. I was talking to this one guy, he says, you know, we can handle two big problems in the global supply chain. We can handle a volcano in Iceland that messes up Europe. We could also handle the shutdown of the Panama Canal. If we had a third one, we probably couldn't handle that and the global supply chain could collapse. He says when that happens, people stop getting fuel and food, and that's a big problem.
We have just a few minutes left, and I want to change gears a bit. You mentioned, we talked a little bit about it yesterday, about the revolutions, the so-called Arab Spring happening in the Middle East. What do the changes that are happening there in North Africa and the Middle East tell us about the net generation?
Well, they're just rich with lessons. I mean, up until 3 months ago or 5 months ago, all revolutions in history had a vanguard. There was a leadership that led the masses and took power, whether it was George Washington or Bolivar in Latin America or, Che Guevara or Mao Zedong. Now we have these things I've called a wiki revolution. The internet not only drops collaboration costs in business, it drops the collaboration and transaction costs of dissent and of rebellion. So these kids came together into the streets, and the web was the tool that they had. And it wasn't just a tool for organizing demonstrations, it was a tool for military action. There, in Tunisia, there were snipers killing unarmed young people in the streets. So the kids took pictures of them with their mobile devices, geolocated them, sent them to friendly units, and the military came in and took out the snipers. You think that social media is about hooking up online. In this case, it was a way of defending people against murderers. Now, of course, these revolutions that don't have leaders bring down the old regime, and that creates a vacuum because there's no organization to win an election or to take power. And politics abhors a vacuum. So now the big step is for these young people to be using the social media to help build a more secular and democratic society so that they could actually win an election.
Let me push back a little bit. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a piece for The New Yorker last year called "Why the Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted." What do you say to those people who believe that optimistic view of what role the internet and the net generation came to play in this revolution is misplaced?
Well, it was a provocative article, and he said that real change only comes about through strong ties, not all these weak ties. There's 200 million people on Facebook causes, but going like is hardly changing the world. He called them slacktivists. Well, people like me argued, well, no, that's wrong, because all strong ties start off as weak ties, I guess with the exception of the relationship between a mother and her baby. That one's strong from the beginning. Then reality intervened and the debate was settled. It was called Tunisia, and then it was called Egypt, and then it was called Yemen, and then it was called, these revolutions wouldn't have happened without the social media. You had the new generation, they're educated, at their tools, or at their fingertips, they have the most powerful vehicles for finding out what's going on, informing others, organizing collective responses, and they were able to come together very quickly. And they came into the workforce. They saw in Tunisia 44% youth unemployment. They didn't like what they see, and they were tired of being subjects, and they showed great courage in bringing about this change. And that debate with Malcolm, that one's done.
You won.
Well, I'd say the debate, the kids won. They settled it, really.
What do you see ahead? What's the next shift for the net generation? Where do we go from here?
Well, there's a big issue. Biggest generation ever. They're coming into the workforce. There's profound youth unemployment, not just in Tunisia, and not just across the Arab world, but in Spain. And we had these huge upsurge in Spain. There's 30% youth unemployment in countries like France And in England, there's 23% youth unemployment in the United States. So there's a potential generational explosion here that if we don't fix this problem of employment, some bad things can happen. People call it a jobless recovery. I hate that term. It's like an oxymoron, you know, it's a contradiction in terms. There is no recovery unless it's inclusive.
Okay, Don, that's all the time we have for tonight.